Fifth Hour Radio Show.
I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, but let's just start the interview off this way. Why Bigfoot? When did you first get the itch?
I've always been interested in Bigfoot. As long as I can remember, even as like a 4 or 5-year-old boy, I was interested in Bigfoots and monsters. And I mean, back then it was an equal mix. I wasn't as Bigfoot centric as I am now, I guess. I liked Godzilla and King Kong and vampires and werewolves, and Bigfoot kind of fell into that. And of course, growing up in the 1970s, I watched all those documentaries, In Search of and all that sort of stuff. And I was just hooked. Bigfoot, real life monster, really here. And of course, all monsters were real to me then. And I've always kind of been a weird kid anyway. I'm still kind of an eccentric guy. Some might argue very eccentric. But I kind of kept that strange interest in the back of my head. And then when I was in college, I had a few-hour break between classes. So I would go into the library and just pick books off of the shelf in subjects that I was interested in, mostly science subjects, because I like science a lot. And I found myself in the anthropology section. And I stumbled across the book that was a collection of scholarly papers written on sasquatches from the perspective of anthropologists, both cultural and physical anthropologists. And reading through that and realizing that it's not only some sort of monster myth sort of thing, and realizing that there's actually science behind a lot of this, it dawned on me that, holy crap, not only are these things quirky and funny and all that stuff, but they might be real. And so I started doing field research, and now 20 years later, or 19 years later, to be fair, I just find myself, enveloped in the whole thing. So,
well, talking about field research, I read somewhere where you had one of the country's largest cast collections. Is that true?
I believe it is true. I mean, I don't know what everybody has, obviously, but I think I'm number 2 behind Dr. Meldrum, and Jeff has he's the caretaker of the entire Freeman collection and all this other stuff. And I certainly give whatever I have to Jeff. Dr. Meldrum's a friend. He was just here at the house last weekend, actually. I gave him 3 or 4 casts to walk away with that he didn't have in his collection. So I figured since Jeff pretty much has all the really interesting things in my collection, he probably has more than anybody else, and rightly so. I mean, for me, they're like baseball cards. They're things to collect, and I have a great interest in them, and I've learned a lot about foot anatomy, and there's a lot of extremely interesting things one can learn by looking at the footprint data.
Do you guys
Jeff
ever
is the anatomist,
You guys ever trade them back and forth?
Oh, of course. In fact, I picked up 3 new ones from Jeff this past weekend. He was in town speaking about the Falcon Project and some other stuff. And he had, and once he was done like selling casts, to help pay for his gas money to try it out here, I looked at what he had left, and there were 3 of them that I did not have. So I was going to buy those from him, but as it turns out, he came over to the house afterwards and went through my collection, and there were 3 casts that I had. So we just traded them straight across.
As far as finding Bigfoot, how did you get cast for that show?
Basically, I was kind of poking around and talking to production companies just about the possibility of a show like this. So I had my feelers out to begin with, and oddly enough, the production companies that I was speaking to told me no one would be interested in watching people walk around on night vision after dark. And I'm thinking, no, you're totally wrong and unimaginative. And then it turns out that Ping Pong Productions, which is our production company, they do the same show. They do that show, Destination Truth, and a few other shows that people might have heard of. They kind of pitched a show, unbeknownst to me, to Discovery Networks, and they found a home for it on Animal Planet, which is owned by Discovery, and then they started trying to cast it. I think they first tried a couple actors or something, and that didn't work out because they didn't know anything. And so they started plumbing the minds of the Bigfoot community. And since I had an online presence at the time, website and a blog, and I'd been on Monsterquest and that Bob Saget thing and whatever else, they got a hold of me and they invited me to participate. And focus groups liked me. I played well on camera, I guess. It's probably the teacher thing in me,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they basically approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to do it. And after a while, we ended up with us 4. So,
did you know any of your other cast members before being brought together on the set?
Yes, I knew Matt and Bobo. I didn't know Renee. I met her actually because of the show. But I knew Matt and Bobo. I think I met both of them on expedition in Northern California back in, I don't know, probably 2005, I think. And since then, I've hung out with Matt a lot. mostly about the Bigfoot thing. I've done trips all over the country with him. And Bobo and I have spent a tremendous amount of time together. I've grown very close to Bobo. He's one of my best friends. And then, so it was kind of a weird coincidence. But when you look at the Bigfoot community, I mean, this is kind of incestuous, weird thing anyway, like we're all in the same stew pot together. So it's likely that I would know the other people on the show if they got Bigfooters.
So how big is Bobo? Is he like
Bobo
6'8", 6'9", or something like that? Because when me and my wife watch the show all the time, and when we're looking at Bobo, we know he's going to be the Bigfoot stand-in always.
Oh, well, sometimes I get to if it's a juvenile, to be fair. But Bobo is a big guy. He's only about 6'4" or so. Depends on boots and all that sort of stuff. But he weighs about 300 pounds, and he's just a beast, man. But like a gentle giant nonetheless.
So basically, that's the guy you want to be with when you're actually looking for Bigfoot, in case you do run into one and it's not happy about meeting you.
Well, something like that, I mean, really, he wouldn't hold a candle to Sasquatches in any way, but at the same time, Bobo's the kind of guy you would want to be with if you're out for an adventure, because he's the kind of guy that adventure finds, whether you want one or not.
Just like being in other jobs amongst fellow coworkers, do you guys ever argue about who knows more about Bigfoot?
Sometimes, I don't know about who knows more, because I'm not really into that, but some members of the cast might have a hard time believing that they don't know something, or they could be incorrect about things.
Have you yourself had a Bigfoot sighting?
I believe I have. I can't be 100% sure, but the context sure seems to indicate that. I saw a bipedal figure in that wooded hillside 2 miles off trail at 2:30 in the morning through a thermal imager. That's how I saw it. And it seemed to be one color from head to toe, which implies that it probably wasn't wearing clothing because it was a very, very cold night. And we also got vocalizations off that same hillside. Matt disagrees. Matt thinks it was a human, but, he went after it, too. So, I don't know. Maybe Matt's right. It was a human being. I really don't know. But to me, at least, and also the way it walked was very peculiar. It didn't walk like Patty. Mm-hmm. It had a very inhuman gait. Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Yeah.
I guess I need to clarify that.
Yeah.
But it had a very inhuman gait. Like the arms looked like it was kind of swimming in a way, if that makes sense. Like, have you ever walked in the shallow end of a pool and kind of helped yourself along by swimming through the water?
Oh yeah.
That's what the arms were doing, and then the legs appeared to me almost like as if they were riding a bicycle, like kind of a circular, weird movement like that. So to me, looking at the context of where we were, when we were, how that thing moved, the fact that Matt went after it and it lost him easily, even though it was navigating the hillside and woods without a light, and we got vocalizations off that same hillside within 45 minutes, I'm inclined to think that what I witnessed was a Sasquatch.
People go to great lengths to hoax a Bigfoot sighting. As a matter of fact, a man lost his life just a few months ago, hoaxing a Bigfoot sighting. Does that make your job a lot harder sifting through fact and fiction, or is it job security?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't look at it as either one of those. I don't think it complicates things too dramatically, although it does waste resources, whether that's time or money. Like the LB hoax, for example. I drove, a bunch of hours to go cast a bunch of fake footprints. But at the same time, the LB hoax was a tremendous learning opportunity for me about fake footprints and what's possible and what's not possible. As far as people lying and hoaxing and all that stuff, I know Bigfoots are real. There's absolutely no doubt whatsoever. It's not a matter of if they're real. I know they are. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about them. And I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm not trying to prove that I'm right. I mean, what kind of weird ego is that? I'm not trying to prove that Bigfoots exist. I know they're real.
Well, how can you tell if a print, a photograph, or video has been hoaxed?
It's very difficult. Casts are a lot easier because you have a three-dimensional representation of the damage done to the ground by the foot. Casts are a lot easier to tell. Photographs, not so much. There's a couple telltale factors that you look for. You look for the breadth of the ball. You look for the breadth of the heel in proportion to the ball. You look for a longitudinal arch, which is the arch that goes from front to back on a human foot. Sasquatches generally lack those, although there are some cases where the footprint appears to make it like they have one, but they don't. You also look at the toe splay, the toe impressions. In humans, you can look at this in your own feet. Your pinky toe is curled under. That's from wearing shoes all your life. For somebody who's never worn shoes, that toe tends to splay out. And actually, that aided our efforts in Australia with the Aboriginal people walking around barefoot all the time. But those are some of the things that you look for in footprints to tell whether they're hoaxed or legitimate Sasquatch prints.
And when you talk about bipedal locomotion, comparing it to like Gigantopithecus, now I know that's been thrown around a lot. Do you think that the creature would sustain as Gigantopithecus, or do you think it's possibly evolved over time?
Well, everything has evolved over time. Human beings have evolved since that time. When Giganto was walking around, our ancestors were Homo erectus, and then we evolved into Homo sapiens, and we've even evolved further than that. We are now designated Homo sapiens sapiens. So every animal is constantly evolving. No animal has finished unless they've gone extinct, and then that's the final form.
Right. Well, how do you feel, and I've heard this theory thrown out, how do you feel about Bigfoot being extraterrestrial?
I don't think it's like what John Green said, there's no need to explain one unknown with another. Now, I kind of base my Bigfoot thoughts on what I observed in the field, and I believe I've been around Bigfoots on a number of occasions, quite close, actually. Mm-hmm. And I have yet to observe anything that indicates these things are from anywhere else but here. What I observe in the field are very typical ape-like behaviors. I've been out literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nights. I wouldn't be surprised if it's well into the 1,000 now. And I have yet to observe anything that I can't attribute to ape behavior. So I'm inclined to think that Sasquatches are extremely intelligent apes, just like us. Because, like it or not, biologically speaking, we are in the ape family. And I know a lot of people take offense to that, but I don't think that's offensive at all. I think that's fantastic that we fit in to the natural scheme of things on planet Earth. That's the way it should be, you know?
Yeah, as far as Patterson Gimlin, a majority of people are going to look at that and they're going to say that's a man in a monkey suit. What do you say?
Well, the majority of people aren't aware of the work that's been done on it and the reasons why that can't be a guy in a monkey suit. Bill Munns, I think, has really put the nail in the coffin as far as that debate goes. There's no chance whatsoever that thing was a guy in a suit. And all you have to do is read through Bill Munns' work. And when you look at what Bill Munns is now producing, Bill Munns was at my house this past weekend as well, I might add. He was here with Meldrum, and Gimlin came by. I had a little Bigfoot party. It was an all-star cast, to say the very least. So many Bigfooters would have given their left arm to be here, like Meldrum and Bindernagel and Gimlin and Munns and Derek Randalls and whoever else, all my freakish sort of, Portland, Oregon, Star Wars Cantina cast of characters that I hang out with here. And just talking to Bill Munns about the work he's been doing on this for years and years and years, there is no chance that was a man in the suit. And anybody who claims otherwise is clearly unaware of what Bill has done.
We got a couple listener questions for you, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm happy to answer whatever.
Okay. Scott Patrick writes in. He says, being that Bigfoot scares a lot of people, do you ever get scared yourself out in the woods? And if not, what does scare you?
Oh, yeah. No, I get scared out in the woods. I'd be lying. I think anybody would be lying to say that doesn't happen ever. Because they are kind of I know they're gentle and smart and all those other things, but they're frankly the things that nightmares are made of. They're giant, beastly things that could rip you apart without even thinking about it. And like it or not, when you're out there in the dark with no fire, and I do this alone a lot. I go out to the woods a lot alone, just sit there. I guess it's kind of weird. But when I'm out there, it's I feel extremely vulnerable. And that's unavoidable. I don't care who you are. You can tote all the firearms you want. That's your security blanket. Go for it. But there's nothing like having giant ape men walking around and they're there. That's unnerving. So absolutely, it can be very frightening. But there came a point in my life I decided not to no longer let fear stop me from doing something. And fear is just like any other emotion. It comes and goes. It's exhilarating at times. It's debilitating at other times. But that's part of the adventure, and, like it or not, that's just part of the game. But I'm not going to let it stop me.
All right. Robert Reams writes in and says, what factual scientific evidence is there that leads Cliff to believe in Bigfoot other than distant alleged sightings and big footprints?
You know what? If there's not actually one piece of evidence that leads me to conclude that Sasquatches are real animals, what it is a congruence of all the available data. when you look, like for example, okay, like when you look at the footprint evidence, Dr. Meldrum, being an anatomist, has discovered some things about the footprints that are consistent with that of other apes. Dr. Krantz, and before him, discovered that the Sasquatch foot is only superficially like a human foot. It's actually quite different. All the same bones are there, but they're placed at different locations, thus changing the biomechanics of the foot, the leverage ratios, basically. Dr. Meldrum's expanded on that now, and the things that they predicted by looking at footprints have been observed in, like, the Patterson-Gimlin film, for example. Jeff is a big fan of the flexibility of the mid part of the Sasquatch foot along the famous mid tarsal break or whatever, you know. You can see the feet moving like that. In the Patterson-Gimlin film, you can see her feet raising up like that. You can see her toes almost pointing to the sky as her foot comes down in a couple of those frames. You can also see the elongation of the heel, which was predicted by Dr. Krantz in his bone reconstructions, which has to do with a biomechanical ratio of like moving a biped of that mass forward. You can see that. It's a congruency of the data. It's also the congruency of sighting reports and what they observe that is consistent with that of other apes. Now, back in the 1860s, for example, they didn't have to report the same shape, size, and behavior of creature that we see today, but yet that's what we have. And there's other points as well. I can talk for some time on that, but that's the short answer. It's not one piece of data. It's the congruency of all the data that really blows my mind.
All right, one more listener question. What happens on the show if you actually find Bigfoot? What's the plan? Who would take custody of the animal if captured alive?
Well, I guess if we found a Bigfoot, we'd have to change the name of the show. It wouldn't be Finding Bigfoot anymore. It'd be Found Bigfoot, you know. But honestly, like, what do you mean by find? It's such an ambiguous term. And I get asked that question a lot. It's like, well, if you film one, what would happen? Well, then we have a film of one, and no one's going to believe it, is the bottom line. Well, what if you capture one? I said, well, who's trying to capture that? I'm not trying to capture a Sasquatch. That'd be so dangerous. And plus, how do you capture a 1,200-pound primate that's just about as smart as us that has hands? You know, like, how do you even do that? Well, tranquilizer guns. Well, tranquilizers are heavily controlled narcotics, and you need a license to even get them. If you could get that PCP, which is basically what it is, animal tranquilizer, if you could get the PCP, like, what do you put on the permit? You know, like, are you hunting leprechauns? I mean, you might as well try to, because it'd be as easy to get. Also, tranquilizer darts, and this has gone over very in depth in Dr. Krantz's book. Tranquilizer darts are far less accurate than bullets, and they have far shorter range. So tranquilizing and capturing and stuff, that's not going to happen. And none of us on the team, not even Matt. And I know Matt's got some bad raps, you know, and some of which are undeserved, right? But he is not a pro-kill person. And some, you know, and there's a lot of debate about kill or no kill and stuff. I'm personally no kill because I don't think that things that are as smart as us should be killed. I think it's just rude. I don't think any ape should be killed. But we're not trying to do that either. So as far as finding a Bigfoot, well, what do you mean by finding? I didn't name the show. I wouldn't have called it that.
Well, let's put you in an imaginary scenario. Let's say that you're out in the woods, you know, and you're scouting and doing recon, trying to, you know, capture Bigfoot or at least evidence of him. And it happens. There he is. And somehow he knocks himself out. Now you've got this Bigfoot laying there. What would you do?
Well, you know, it heavily depends on the circumstances. And clearly a Sasquatch wouldn't knock himself out. But, you know,
I was looking at Randy when he said that. Like, really?
I mean, I got to get the thing unconscious so you can at least have the upper
hand. Well, yeah, okay. Like, there's a couple circumstances that one can hope for. And I personally don't hope for dead Sasquatches. But if it's going to happen, then, you know, and I'm involved somehow, I would like it to be some sort of accidental death or a natural death, you know, like roadkill, for example. Well, I'm thinking that if I'm out in the woods and I smell a rotting corpse, and I do this all the time, by the way. I did this 2 days ago, actually. I smelled a rotting corpse way off trail. I was up in Mount St. Helens in Ape Canyon this past weekend, filming some stuff for my next DVD. But, like, I ran across a corpse smell, and I eventually found it. It was actually a bear scat that had been eating some carrion. I always look for the source of dead smells in hopes of one day finding something like what you mentioned. If that happened, as grisly as it would be, if I ran across a naturally dead or accidental corpse of a Sasquatch, I would cut off the biggest piece I could carry, preferably the head, even that's a horrible, grisly thought, pack it out immediately, store it, and go back for the rest of it. But in the meantime, frankly, I would call Dr. Meldrum. He's an anatomist. He has great experience in dissection and cadavers. He would help me every step of the way, and I know he trusts me. He trusts my judgment, and I would put it in the hands of someone like Jeff in order to get it thoroughly and properly documented.
So let's talk about what you got going on right now. You just mentioned you had a DVD out. That's called the Bigfoot Roadtrip, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. Volume 1 of Bigfoot Roadtrip has just been released this past weekend. On Friday, it just went for sale. And it's, it's kind of a product of the last few years of my life because, I mean, I made Bigfoot on television. I may go Bigfooting on television, but I'm doing this stuff anyway. Like, I've been Bigfooting for almost 20 years now out in the field. And my friend Craig Flippy, who lives here in Portland, Oregon, he likes, he's always been like a video hobbyist. So, and he likes going Bigfooting and going to wild places. So he and I go camping a lot together. And we just started filming our adventures. And over time, we started editing it together. And as I worked on the television show, I learned more and more about the production, like how to make television, basically, because there's a certain craft-skill to it all, and we started piecing these things together. And so Bigfoot Roadtrip is kind of the product of that, in combination with the criticism I received for being on Finding Bigfoot. Because, I think everybody realizes that television is a shallow, fairly superficial medium. And it's necessarily that way because of the time constraints. To give you an idea, when we put an episode of Finding Bigfoot together, we were in a location for 8 days. We shoot over 100 hours of footage, and then we edit that 100 plus hours down to 43 and a half minutes because that's our allotted airtime. So it's necessarily rather shallow and superficial. You can't go in depth. You miss most of the interviews we do with the witnesses and all the details that come out. So I go in depth. In fact, when I watched the Bigfoot Roadtrip final cut, I thought some parts were too long and boring, and that's what I want. I made Bigfoot Roadtrip for nerds like me who want more information than television gives.
One of the things I always thought was interesting is when you guys were doing the town hall meetings. Is there ever a time when somebody's giving their testimony about Bigfoot and you're just thinking, oh, you liar?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, can you actually spot when somebody's just wanting attention or whatever?
Not always, but there's a lot of telltale signs. And I have the blessing of having been an elementary school teacher for 14 years. And really, there's not that much of a difference between 10-year-olds and adults when it comes down to it. A lot of adults act like 10-year-olds, whether they realize it or not. And that body language is still there. I'm pretty good at nailing when kids are lying. It's just almost a sixth sense. I can read their facial expressions. I can listen to their voice inflection. I can read their body language. I know when a 10-year-old's lying, which helps me a lot with adults. Now, having said that, there are some weirdo people in the world who may not realize they're lying. There are also people who are telling half-truths. And there are people that lie and are very, very, very good at it. So certainly we get hoodwinked sometimes. But generally speaking, it's pretty easy to put some of those to bed.
Well, we're almost out of time here, but can you tell our listeners about your social media and your website so they can find out more information about you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a website that houses all my research and data. It's called Barackman.com. I also have a blog that I just kind of update with things that I find are interesting, NorthAmericanBigfoot.com. And I guess, for this time of year right now, since the DVD's out, BigfootRoadtrip.com is where you can buy that DVD. And if I can plug that one more time, there are, on Bigfoot Roadtrip, there are 2 unknown casts that I uncover and do a backstory of. There's a photograph of a Sasquatch that I am positive is a Bigfoot that was given to me to use, and no one has ever seen it from the Klamath River. And I show you the math that proves, in my mind, that it was a Bigfoot. I do an expose on Derek Randall's and the Olympic Project. There's more Bigfoot information, more research in this one DVD than I've seen in any other DVD, with the possible exception of Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. And on top of it all, there are puppets. So I think it's a really enjoyable DVD. It's family-friendly, and it's jam-packed with Bigfoot information. Bigfoot Roadtrip.
Well, Cliff, man, thanks so much for taking your time out of your day and joining us.
I'm happy to do so. I'm just, I may do this on TV, but I'm no celebrity. I'm just a Bigfoot nerd. I love talking Squatch.
The 25th Hour Radio Show.